You know, lately I've been having an urge to rant. Better yet, to review. And what better to review than something from modern D&D, cause Lord knows from my last video I have plenty to talk about. Hello people, I'm D-Scorpion, and today we're taking a look at probably one of the more interesting adventures posted by Wizards of the Coast in 5th edition D&D. Journeys through the Radiant Citadel, an anthology collection of various adventures made up from different cultures placed within the D&D universe that was released in the summer of 2022, and later in 2023 getting some nominations and actually winning some awards I've never heard of. The project was conceived by one Ajit George, who pitched the idea to Jeremy Crawford, and in September of 2020 they assembled a team entirely of people of color, and there were plenty of sites that made note of this, especially Polygon, who upgraded from ass-kissing to full-on virtue-signaling cunnilingus. And the overall idea of the book was to bring forth these cultures and civilizations to more of a forefront in the fantasy scene as kind of a change of shape and better representation. Something that I'm actually not really fully against. I like my Northwest medieval fantasy. It is a staple of just what fantasy is. But it's also like kind of eating cereal every day. It kind of gets bland after a while. And you know, I want to try something different. Let some new chefs in the kitchen. Let them cook a bit. Try something new. Except what I'm given is burnt toast, uncooked bacon, eggs that have now fully hatched into chicks, and if I call anything wrong, I get yelled at by the food itself. Yeah, I don't think this book's great. Now, a few things before I start diving in. I kind of want to reiterate something from my last D&D video that I probably didn't make super clear. To reiterate just a bit, I don't necessarily like politics. I don't like participating in them. I don't really like talking about them. However, just because I say I don't like these things doesn't mean I don't form my own opinions about this kind of stuff still. It doesn't mean I don't occasionally share them, especially when there is other political messaging that's very blatant and clear throughout this book. And trust me, there are plenty of things in here that you can basically just go down a checklist. Hell, you can have a checklist for most of the authors if you just quickly look them up. Though all that being said, I will try to keep things to a minimum because, like I said, I don't like talking about it. But then going back to the authors, I'm actually going to avoid trying to speak on them directly. Mostly because I just want to be focusing on the work that they have written. However, I will make one quick note that it does kind of worry me that a lot of the interviews I find here from like their page doesn't really go over like how long they've been playing D&D. Some people like Mario can give a good estimate. Other people are just like, oh, we've played D&D, but we're not going to specify how long. So these people could easily have just been playing for like 3, maybe 5 years. There's other times they will even just say like this is the first time they are writing a D&D adventure. So they're immediately coming into this as fresh blood. And I don't really think that's great, especially on a product that you're trying to sell. I would really much rather have people actually have more experience and an idea of how adventures work before kind of going into and like publishing it. It just kind of then feels like you're just plucking people off the street first time and say, here's an adventure. On one last note, I will be going into spoilers for these adventures, just because, like, I can't really talk about the problems and my thoughts in whole if I don't go into the details that have to spoil the adventure. But with that out of the way, let's jump right into the book and just get into the intro section, with a bit of paraphrasing. Journeys through the Radiant Citadel is an anthology of exciting adventures that explores the cultures and myths of various realms created by members of the Dungeons & Dragons community with connections to various real-world cultures and mythologies. Embark on the adventures of the Radiant Citadel will expand your gaming horizons, can give your characters new perspectives, and might change the way you look at fantasy tropes and traditions. I'm sorry, are you already trying to lecture me? Alright, let's just... These thoughtful introductions? Well, this is just great. Yeah, broad descriptions, detail, no stereotypes. As some societies strongly associate ethnicity with skin color, take extra care when describing character skin colors. Online and streamed games. What? One person's culture isn't another's costume. If you dress up, simple outfits are best. Avoid leaning into stereotypes or clothing with real-world religious... Okay, hold on. Stop. You literally just said that most of these worlds are based on these real-world places, cultures, and mythologies. But the way that you're describing this is that these are actually the real-world cultures themselves, which, yes, that's typically not how fiction works. It draws from the mythologies and makes it its own. It's not a one-to-one ratio and simply saying, like, this is this culture exactly. Oh god, that's what the book is going to do, isn't it? Alright, okay, well, before I start hanging up on that, let's actually get to the actual Citadel itself. Let's see here. The Citadel is within the ethereal planes, founded by 27 civilizations, abandoned for some reason centuries ago, and I guess refounded however recently by 15 of the original. It is a nexus of diplomacy, a sanctuary for immigrants escaping war in harsh lands. Built upon the skeletal fossil remains of some massive creature around a massive diamond which changes color and gives life to the city, giving vegetation, water, and light. The leaders of the said citadel are the speakers of the ancestor, one for each civilization, or the ones that recently have found it, usually holding office for 10 years before stepping down or going through their selection process again through the Dawn Incarnates. They typically meet in a mega garden where it's all public, transparent, and everyone can participate in these meetings. Each speaker usually holds equal power and treats everyone equally, though their duties are to the Citadel first. To which their whole entire government is basically egalitarian. Citizens are entitled to basic income, and most resources are equally accessible throughout the city. Healing is based off of means and practically free for the poor. There's not to mention that all healing for players is practically insane. There are pretty high taxes for the rich, and the poor are basically spared, even for entering the city. Hell, there's even free housing for the poor. There's a lot of emphasis on supporting the poor in this society. It kind of makes you wonder why money is even a factor. They're also vegetarian, and imports are brought in by the Concord Jewel. Basically, massive floating space gems that act as transport to different... I think you kind of get the idea. Those are kind of the broad aspects of what the city is. And it's a utopia! And that's the problem. Nothing about this place feels like it would ever need help. The Concord Jewels, well, you might think, even though they might have to hire adventurers for... like, I don't know, getting to location, never get lost. And already being in the ethereal plane, and that's basically a massive sea of space and nothing, I kind of doubt, like, they would ever really get raided a lot. At least it's not really brought up too often. If ever in this section, if I've read this correctly. There's something called the Keening Gloom, which is like a storm that apparently receded when the Citadel was first refounded, but it's so vague and not as much given detail that I don't even know what it is. Is it an elemental? Is it a god? Is it just a weird killer fart cloud? We don't know. It's not really treated as a proper threat. Crime in the city is also just described as extremely low. There are no prisons around. And while there are guards at maybe like the one entrance to the city, there aren't really seemingly anything else here. Though apparently the worst offenders, though, go through some vague, controversial ritual to not repeat the crime. That's how they word it. It's a ritual to somehow prevent the person from repeating the crime. So they should be fine. Well, no, because then they're immediately kicked out to God knows who where. Let me just get this straight. You have a process that prevents the worst offenders in your city to prevent the same crime again. Hell, you could say it's a lobotomy. You could say that you turn into like those guys in Dragon Age Origins of mages where they're just docile. They're not a threat anymore or problem. And you just kick them out to buttfuck nowhere? Are you kidding me? That's kind of what I'm thinking. It's like it really is trying to make flaws, but the flaws to also then just feel too extreme. Like the speakers, while all of them try to get along, and while everything is also based on majority votes, every single one of them just has a super veto. Remember those Concord Jewels? They can just shut them down. And if either the person dies or they leave for too long and they don't have a replacement, everything just shuts down and the whole place dies. It's like everything here depends on cooperation. And I'm just thinking, like, how is it that they don't have problems before? None of this is really listed. And also just, how is this a good idea? Moreover, when you just stop and think about it, this is very clearly the wet dream of a leftist college freshman who thinks this is the perfect government. There is a huge emphasis on open government meetings, equal power for all, a huge emphasis on the poor, taxing the rich, and yet for right here it says like the needs of like larger sellers are more than smaller sellers with high taxes and tariffs. I'm not sure if I'm reading that right, but are you screwing over the smaller sellers? Not to mention that typically it even mentions that there is not really a police force or an army. This idea was pitched around 2020. I wonder what was happening during then. Oh, and also, they prefer non-lethal methods of detainment. Now, granted, they do have some defense. so they're not entirely helpless. But this quickly turns into now just a little kid just going when they're losing an argument. The speakers can just come together and form a massive force field that just deflects everything. It even stops teleports. The diamond itself that gives off light is indestructible, so that, again, that's not even another threat you need to worry about. If a sudden army does get into the city, there's just now suddenly a whole bunch of squads of archmages and mages and retired adventuring vets in this, like, I'm guessing a non-homophobic Salvation Army to, like, help out. To just out of the blind, the diamond can also just immediately light up and blind everyone. And apparently sneaking in is just almost impossible because, again, there's only one entrance and most of the guards, as described here, have telepathy helms. And if somehow you do get in, if you somehow just teleport when the shield's down, and if you do get caught, you just get fined. That's it. They don't even kick you out. I'm honestly also wondering if this is just like another metaphor for what they want to say. This is honestly just, the way that this is all just written just makes it feel like it's supposed to be the perfect society. There's no need for any threat. There's no need for any actual adventuring here. And overall, it's just boring. It feels more than just like an actual safe haven. It feels like a literal safe space. And then immediately makes it return. But that's enough about the Citadel. I don't want to get too hung up about it. Let's start jumping into the actual adventures. Let's start our first adventure. We have Salted Legacy, based off the night markets in Thailand. Two rival families are basically getting riled up with each other as each one is kind of getting their own stand kind of tormented or broken down. And the party is then stepped in by both families to see if one party or the other is actually responsible for them. Your party then goes around to each other vendor asking questions, but you have an easier time if you participate in the games, which are a food eating contest, a cooking competition, and a game of hide and seek. Okay. You eventually find out about the Windlings, these weird flying fey monkey creatures, and you find out that Kasim, one of these fuckers, is responsible for it. See, both of these guys are brothers, and one is getting married and going away, and the other brother can't run his stand without him. So his grand plan is to ruin another family business to then take it over. Okay, first off, I already have like all these other questions up here that I'm asking, but regardless, if you confront Kasim, he just immediately folds like an armlet and just confesses, to which either leads him to getting kicked out of the market or just being taken in by another family. So again, that kind of brings back to one of my questions. But even then, if you do fail, it's kind of very low stakes. I mean, yes, one of the families eventually goes out of business, but that doesn't really affect you as a party, or even as like a super big tragedy since you just met these people. I don't know. The adventure itself, I think overall though, being low stakes or just not really super high pack action adventure is definitely a change of pace and can be warranted sometimes, but I also feel like it doesn't really give that sense of like what D&D is all about. I will say though, I do like the little reference between the two families of one being kobolds and one being gnomes. And on top of that, if I recall from the author's video talk, one of the NPCs is actually based off her grandmother, and just it looks so, I'm not gonna lie, it looks cute. It's heartwarming. I love the fuzzy little caterpillars. It's really nice. I can't really say too much about this adventure because it's also the first one in the book. It's meh. Moving on to our second adventure, Written in Blood is more the representation of the South experience in the USA, which I'm also just going to say right now is probably my least favorite adventure out of this book. The area of God's Breath is created by the gods as yet another safe haven for a group of people. And overall, the area is just more of a collection of farms and collective farmland. And that's kinda it though. I will say that a lot of the lore does kinda get pretty dark. Like there's a story of like an owner who like killed their family, there's like severed hands, a kid drowns in a lake. I will say it's pretty gruesome. But to get into the actual adventure, the party goes to attend the festival before it's interrupted by an attack by farmers who appear possessed. And while the players can defend themselves, it is heavily recommended that they try not to kill any of the farmers. After the conflict, they are met by a character known as Deli, who basically asks them to try to find their goddaughter Karina, because she worries for her and things are getting pretty bad. Which, immediately, they are approached by another NPC called Lady Dre, who just announces she'll be joining you. Okay, which then afterwards you are yet met with another NPC, Tungsten Ward, who's basically just a bard / chronicler, who also just wants to join you. I don't really feel like that's how it should go. It feels weird just to have the book immediately say they come to you. like a magnet. They are there also to help with lore, but outside of that, they're pretty irrelevant outside the rest of the adventure. Along the way of trying to find the daughter, you kind of help a man escape from giant coyotes, you get stuck in a sinkhole, you finally reach the farmhouse, where then Dre and Tungsten just both abandon you along the way. Entering the farmhouse, you do find Kiana, but also something called a soul shaker, which is honestly a pretty cool monster, but in turn, it's just a giant collection of crawling hands into some monstrosity, and that's it. You fight the soul shaker, and supposedly, I guess, also maybe fight Karina somehow, even though it says like she kind of stays in the corner and it doesn't really involve her in combat. Anyways, if you kill the soul shaker and kill all the crawling hands that spawn out of it, you basically break the curse, everyone kind of goes back to normal, and yada yada yada. That's it. I really don't know how to feel about this adventure. I will say it's pretty straightforward for the most part, so there's that, but the NPCs that are immediately shoved into you just kind of feel pointless and are just for exposition dump. The artwork, while I understand it's supposed to be of another culture and kind of supposed to be significant to it, just is not my cup of tea. And more so, the actual style of the art doesn't really read fantasy to me. I mean, for crying out loud, she's wearing jeans. That kind of stuff does not really resonate with me. There's a certain element of like time periods where it's like where you can kind of fit fantasy in and it just makes sense, and it feels like you're in another era, another world. Here, it just kind of hits a bit too close to home for me. Not to mention that even though the Little Gazetters, that mentions that there are some fancy races, they're pretty limited, and it's mostly just humans, so even then, more of those fancy elements just don't really resonate. And even then, most of the fancy elements are pretty minimal, because a good chunk of the monsters that you fight are just giant versions of bigger animals. It does not read as close to fantasy to me. It also doesn't help that if you actually go to the interview video on D&D's YouTube page, this has the highest dislike ratio out of all the other interviews. Oof. Up next, Fiend of Hollow Mine, where we get a look at Mexico. A magical curse is killing across the land. Wait, hold on. No. Something's not right here. Something's missing. Okay, go to Google. How to. Gotta go to here. Just the city. There we go. Okay, now we're in Mexico. There. All right, where was I? Ah, yes. A magical curse is killing across the land, and close to the time of the Night of the Remembered, which is basically just Day of the Dead. Another festival. The adventure ultimately begins when your party enters a town and begins a shootout between bounty hunters and presumably criminals. Or more likely, just the bounty hunters just attack you on sight without really addressing you, okay? But when you fend them off, you then meet a skeleton who's a tavern over. That's pretty fun. Where you also meet Paloma the Outlaw, who's Robin Hood of the land, is some sort of revolutionary and apparently is loved by the people, but none of this really makes any sense or is relevant to the actual adventure. In fact, pretty much in the end game, you basically attend a festival where everyone's partying and everyone's happy, so you wouldn't really get that idea. So it's just really weird that they try to introduce his character and try to play it off this way, and you're also just kind of supposed to believe it, I guess, if you want to continue adventures here when that's not even really set up afterwards during the adventure. Either way, Paloma is affected by the magical disease that's roaming around the land and tells the players where they might find the source at a mine. Your party travels there, and soon they meet Itzman, which is basically the corrupt politician involved in all of this, but he's less of a politician in this case and much more of just like an evil cultist, as he's a follower of Pazuzu. Wait, really? Your party gets trapped in a mine, you go through a small dungeon crawl, and then you make your way to Sitlan, where you then find a woman of Donna Rosa, who's the mother of the supposed Fiend, because, long story short here, and now she doesn't want you to kill him. You chase Itzman down, you chase the demon down, you have a confrontation, and whether or not the son dies is really up to you and how you handle it. Honestly, it's actually not that bad of an adventure, I think. There's definitely more elements of fantasy here than I typically like. I'm not really a super huge fan of Paloma, and I think overall it's not a bad adventure. Overall. I'd probably run it. I'd probably play it. Wages of Vice is our fourth adventure that takes the players to another festival. This is the third one in a row. What the fuck? Okay, well anyways, the party stumble across a dead dwarf, run into some bodyguards, and soon meet Madame Samira Ara, one of the Kings of Coin, one of 6 rulers that basically run the whole city. The party is told of attacks that target the king's kids, and are essentially hired by Samira to investigate, because she kind of wants to make sure this is leverage and just gain control of the city all to herself. So already I don't like her. But soon after, when yet another heir is attacked, and then find Minx Nargi Ruba. I think I said that right, I don't care. While questioning him, another fight breaks out with his daughter close by, and you kind of jump in to defend. Though, once again, you kind of want to be careful because the people are not acting like themselves. So violence is an option, but it's not necessarily the right answer. There afterwards, Ruba kind of breaks down and confesses about the backstory of all of this. See, he and the other 6 kings long ago made a deal with a witch to get really good wine to get profits up. But for some reason, he decided, nah, you know what? The price was too high to give their firstborn children to the witch, so he convinced all the other kings to kill her, without realizing that she'd have a daughter that, might want revenge. And on top of that, this guy, this jolly-looking motherfucker, decided to plan a murder. I'm not saying looks are deceitful, but I'm saying you might want to make this guy look a bit more sleazy in his art. After this confession, you finally know about Kala, you find your way to the parade where it's the final confrontation, you kind of clean things up. Samira is quickly able to show up, take her into custody, and ultimately just kind of start playing the moves for her power grab. That's kind of it. This adventure's just not really super interesting to me. Everyone here just kind of feels shitty. I'm not a fan of Samira. Max Rubar's just an idiot. And everyone that you kind of meet just feels like kind of a shitty person, and it's stupid. I'm not a fan of this one. Sins of the Elder is our next adventure. The players can come by for yet another festival. Are all these adventures going to involve a fucking festival? But that's not the only adventure hook that you can use, thank fuck. The city is under a weird incident where people are having memory loss due to fogs, and various attacks occur during these fog incursions. You're approached by the magistrate, who basically gives you details on the incidents and asks the party for help. You then basically investigate a series of sites that can range from being attacked by targers to going on a bit of a treasure hunt. Meeting up with the NPC, Yonggi, you can actually learn more about the backstory of this, where he basically kind of downplayed the ghost and haunting, that she did all the hard work, but she never got any of the credit, and he feels bad for it. So basically, soon after this, you can then meet the spirit near a park and bring all these amulets to her to convince her to work in peace, or even talk with her to put her to rest and actually spread information about her to the city, so she actually then puts to rest. Because if I'm reading this correctly, fighting her actually does nothing. It's not an actual viable solution. She'll just keep coming back. With all that said, however, I actually don't really think this is that bad of an adventure. Personally, I like it. The artwork overall is pretty good. I'm always a sucker for Dragonborn. I love the way they're designed here. But as I mentioned, it does feel like you do need to negotiate to complete the adventure. And that does kind of feel a bit disappointing, but with a bit of homebrew, you can make it work. I'm also a bit disappointed because the unique monster called the Guishin is just the ghost stat block. I don't know, it kind of feels lackluster that you couldn't really try to make it more unique or anything. I still personally like it. Okay, we also still have a lot more adventures to go through, so I'm just going to try and speed this up. Gold for Fools and Princes, based on the Mali Empire of pre-colonial Africa. Basically, there's a collapsed mine, you learn about some rival princes who both want to rescue the miners just for fame and try to take a claim to the throne. You're attacked by skeletal scorpions, and then are approached by a escaped miner to give you some more details. If you do some investigating ahead of time, you know that one of the princes is kind of shady with a weird shaman man. You do a dungeon crawl, this said previous shady prince tries to off the other, kind of a clear choice of who you should be supporting, and afterwards, depending on the adventure, you leave to the good prince, or you could just kind of leave back to a power struggle. I don't like this adventure. It feels like it should be you're trying to pick sides of the obvious good prince, but then maybe not the best outcome. Meanwhile, the corrupt prince is obviously the bad choice, but could be better in the long run, actually. There could be more of a moral dilemma here, but you don't get that. And the monster is fucking laughable. It's a giant ferret. How am I supposed to be intimidated by a giant ferret? Now, a honey badger, on the other hand, trail of destruction based on the Aztec culture. Volcanic eruptions have been causing problems throughout the land, and the players encounter a fight that's from the get-go. Alright, already off to a pretty good start. As you're asked to investigate, you go to see the observatory and run into Olin, who apparently has a over-the-top persona and will tag along with you regardless. Oh yay, another mandatory NPC that you don't really have a say. They were so fun and written in blood. Good. You do make it to the tower, but it collapses with you either saving or having to resurrect the main watcher to get the info. So it doesn't really matter if he dies, you can just resurrect him. Demi, you learn to travel to the Grate of Illumination. You travel across the land with a bunch of weird encounters, including a fire giant that requires a DC 14 charisma check to pat. That's incredibly low. So you eventually reach a gate, run to a small dungeon crawl, and find a fire oxyotl. To which either you kill him, or if you somehow kept Olin, you can convince him to stop. Because then Olin will just be there to be his personal dancer and friendship. Yeah, no, this is a weird adventure. I mean, the thing is, I really do like Aztec culture. I learned about it a lot when I was younger. But the ending to this is kind of a weird choice. Again, because even though violence is an option, you are also kind of wanting to keep Olin around for, like, the best possible ending, I guess, because you can't just have a monster you need to straight up kill outside of a giant fluffy ferret. Yeah, I don't know. This has potential, but it's got flaws. In the Mists of Manny Varsha, based on Bengal. This one starts off with the start of the shotgun trials, basically the Olympics, which is another fucking festival. God damn it! Basically, one of the contestants, Amanisha, is about to win, but then a giant wave rolls in and apparently sweeps her away. There's massive destruction and chaos, and ultimately, afterwards, you kind of have to go back and find out what happened. You essentially meet a server bro called Duca, who can be hired to help travel. And I guess it's kind of cool when you go through the adventure, if you do go with that. Eventually, you do find a river fiend, some sort of, like, water spirit, who can give you some info. And eventually, you do find Nisha and discover a Jibisha. Gigi Bisha, which was the previous champion of the tournament and doesn't want Nisha usurping her title, along with yet another river spirit who apparently sank the city? I guess? Is this important? Is this part really important? Basically, if you beat the Jujubee, you can bring Nisha back and complete the goal. This one is just meh. I'm not really interested. Between Tangled Roots, based on the Philippines. Okay, you have my attention. Then it's basically a Bakunawa. Bakunawa. Yeah, okay, got it. Good. A Bakunawa, which is basically just a giant dragon. I'm just going to say dragon. Attacks a town nearby, and you kind of can go there to investigate. This, you're asked by Nimule and their partner, which is a weird dryad thing, to investigate the attack and possibly bring it to peace. You travel to something called the Skybridge, which is actually pretty dope. You meet Palo and his dragon hunter band along the way, as they have reasons to kill the dragon. Again, use the bridge, you find Lambakluha. The tree where the dragon is, and discovered that it was corrupted, but you can clear the corruption. So, yeah, again, you can either clear the corruption, or you can kill it along with the dragon hunters. Or you can also kill the dragon hunters before clearing it. Or, again, best ending, negotiate with the dragon hunters and then clear the corruption, because that's, yeah. And then everything just kind of rolls out from there. I will say, I am actually kind of interested now in, like, more Philippines lore, because this did catch my attention. But at the same time, like, I'm also kind of seeing the flaw in that, because these are pretty small, compact adventures, you don't really get a whole lot to explore outside of the Gazetteer that can also only explain so much, because once again, you're kind of compacting all this into, like, one small area. I don't get why someone needed to create an NPC going into detail on having a relationship with this tree thing. Moving on. Shadow of the Sun, based on Iranian culture. Alright, pretty cool. Another festival, but this one's in background detail. Thank fuck. It's basically you have a terrorist group causing an uprising, to which the local angel, which I'm not even going to attempt the names anymore. You start out in the market and come into conflict with purple worms caused by the terrorists. As you're approached by the angels, you're kind of roped in to help deal with this. You investigate the bazaar, eventually leading to a flying carpet chase. A flying carpet chase. I don't want to say that doesn't sound fun, but I also feel like if anyone else besides the Iranian author here were to write this, they would immediately get canceled or say that you're stereotyping. Anyways, eventually you will lead a chase onto the main terrorist layer and you fully take them out. But then all of a sudden you have a second group to deal with, known as the Silent Roar, which is generally a lot better with non-violent protests, but even still, the angel just doesn't want disruption, alright? So now this eventually allows you to keep walking the path of the angels or go to the Silent Roar, and whatever change of the city happens, it really depends on you to either prevent an outbreak or partake in an outbreak. Like, this one, I kind of like. It has that feel. I've heard people talk about this before, but it kind of has that New Vegas feel where you can just kind of choose what faction you can join and kind of affect the outcome. It does still need a bit of work, though. And on top of that, again, I still think it's a little hypocritical to have, like, a whole magic flying carpet chase, just considering, like, other people would probably say that would be stereotypical, when the book even says don't be stereotyping. The Night Sees Sakura. This one is a bit weird because it's not really based off of civilization, but more of different culture of one people. So the party starts out with a haunting of the ghost, and then you find out about the Black Mist Ways, which is martial arts. You also shouldn't attack the spirits, again, because you're supposed to talk with them. You then also meet with one Atiba Pa to try to recover these tomes, because they want to recover their lost legacy. You then come across Geneba, and you then get an offer to give the tomes to them, because they want the tomes for their cultural significance. You then start to set sail and actually then dive down into the ocean to find the city of Janya. Wait, hold on. Hold the fuck up. Janya and Jane. Why do these... Okay, technically, yes, these are spelled differently, but they sound similar. Why? Do you not think that's going to get confusing, like, say, Bronn and Bran in Game of Thrones? Anyways, you go down to this video, you find yet 2 other players who want the tomes. One wanting to then reconnect with the Surfed world, and one finally to destroy it and just have everyone build their own new culture. So you go to the apparent shipwreck where the tomes are, you dungeon crawl with an aboleth, that's pretty cool, and then you decide what to do with the tomes. Though, in my personal opinion, looking at this, I think one option kind of feels like the better of the two. 4. Oh my god, my brain's rotting. I don't like this one. I feel like a lot of players won't really care about the tomes because the tomes themselves are just the MacGuffin. They don't actually give you anything if you want to even keep them for yourself. And for some reason, the adventure also will say, like, you can keep them for yourselves for whatever reason, outside of just the reward of everyone getting angry at you. And the naming, I don't like the naming. This is just no. Buried Dynasty, based on Chinese culture. Okay, cool. I'm rushing through these last few parts. You're tasked to help find a potion for the Emperor to help sustain his life. Secretary Wei hires the party to go down to a very specific, archaeological site to try and meet them. You go down to the dungeon. When you can't find what Wei wants, she basically betrays you by collapsing the entrance and sending you to a death pit. You somehow escape, confront the Emperor, and confront Wei, and then if you present enough pieces of evidence, which throughout the adventure you should, and convince the Emperor, he won't punish Wei immediately, but he'll deal with her later and you won't get kicked out. Otherwise, if you fail, you get to go by and just get kicked out. You don't no death punish. Okay, fine. Fucking whatever. It's at the very least, this is just it's a basic dungeon crawl. There's not really whole much to say, but I think it is meh. Finally, Orchids of the Invisible Mountain, based on Venezuela. It's very Feywild heavy. So, let's just run through it. Save a burning sugar farm. Go see a woman in a mirror. Try to go get a quest to find a snake. Travel the lands. Encounter a thrycreen. Go to a termite mound. Travel to the orchid. Follow a bird to help clear spirit. Fight more aboleth. Now you gotta go find a hammock to the world to bring back the spirit snake. Or spirit of the snake. You go find the draw elders, which are giant termite corpses in deep space. You go to bring the stone back. The snake wakes up. All is well. I will say it's one of the more unique adventures. It's definitely unique. It's really wacky. Goes out there. I'll give it bonus points for that. And that's really all the main adventures that you can go through. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, that was only 13 of the 15 civilizations. And you would be correct. The last 2 are basically just gazetters in the very back of the book. The first one is basically based off of India that actually kind of has some pretty interesting notes to it that it came from a civil war. And currently actually has like a whole bunch of significant other races like elves, hobgoblins, lizard folk, and Yuan-Ti people in the population. That honestly would make it pretty cool and actually fun to explore if it actually was given a proper adventure, maybe. And the last one is just more seaworthy Japan. I'm guessing. There's like a heavy emphasis on like whaling for some reason. It's apparently very matriarchal. I don't care if I'm misusing that word. And really it just kind of goes over the ideas of like clothing describes class and perfume describes gender. And that's kind of it. I really tried to give this book a fair shot. I imagine some of the authors behind it were really excited on actually representing their culture in a more mainstream way. And like I mentioned, I'm not against the idea of bringing in different cultures to have a bit more variety in your adventures. but the book just sucks. The Citadel itself is too perfect. Whatever flaws are there are very well hidden or just blatantly stupid, like that one ritual. Any threat is made irrelevant with how many defenses they can just suddenly summon, or the Keening Gloom just mostly being described rather than actually having any threat. There's just nothing, and it doesn't really give you a reason to explore the city. An anthology for this book does not give enough room to really flesh out all these different civilizations. You're kind of cramming everything together. You're very limited on what you can actually write. I also feel like at the end of the day, the writers also don't go far enough to make these areas interesting because, again, they're just trying to make these civilizations into the real world sites. They're not really trying to push more of that fantasy or fiction element to them to actually make them exciting to play through. Nor does it help of the whole play this appropriately message at the start. It honestly kind of makes me wonder if this was like also kind of more of a start for other releases or other notes that they would later publish. Like in their latest book, they basically have a full consent section on a eldritch horror adventure. Even afterwards, a lot of the adventures also feel like they were just referencing from a template. The amount of times I had to read that there was like a festival going on, or at least involved with the setting, almost became ludicrous and became laughable. But then the more I read into like the gazetters and more of the finer details, and the more I actually started kind of going down a certain checklist, the more I was just like sad, and it's like, this is way too convenient. Most of the artwork throughout the book, I will say, is good, and I do like it. But others, at best, are representing a cultural art style that doesn't resonate with me. Or, at worst, I just think absolutely sucks and is unappealing. I'm also just wondering if the art department is just getting canned at this point. Their Vaults book had a piece that has this uncanny realistic vibe to it that you would see on a porn game on Steam. Or better yet, the more controversial take of the use of AI art in their Bigby book, which they claim they didn't know about, even though the artist very clearly states in their Twitter profile, and I guarantee you that they probably looked at their profile. And at the end of the day, while this is trying to be representative of different cultures, it also just comes off more as virtue signaling for profit. And I think more recently now, this kind of method is starting to backfire. More specifically with Bungie earlier on Twitter, as they made this tweet to basically, appeal to the Latin and Hispanic community. Only for said Latin and Hispanic community to come into the comments saying they hate this, and then for Bungie to then start silencing them. This actually happened. They're trying to do this to make themselves feel better and feel above others, and it's stupid. I feel like a lot of people also were just quickly able to recognize this, and hence the low sales numbers for this book. This book to me mostly just comes off as the beginning of the end of what WotC is trying to do, because I almost feel like ever since every other product and everything else surrounding Wizards of the Coast has been going downhill with Dungeons and Dragons, because quickly following this was the Spelljammer controversy, and then earlier this year was the OGL controversy, which I think, and you kind of get the idea. It just, there's no faith left from me in Wizards. It's clear what kind of market they're trying to appeal to, while also very clear on what kind of people are trying to make this. And I'm getting tired of it. You're better off looking at like third-party creators or even other game systems if you're looking for more diverse settings and actually having fun with the system. Because if anything on the latest news of how Dungeons and Dragons is going, we're just going to see more content like this, and on top of that, we're going to be paying a lot more than we're actually going to be playing. But yeah, those are my thoughts. The book sucks. I'm thinking sometime in the future soon, I might do more D&D content, but on either older 5e products or just older D&D content in general, because I actually want to be positive about D&D for once. And if you would like to see more of that content, please subscribe and wait for when I eventually upload that stuff. If you like this video, please hit the like button, maybe share it around, and leave a comment down below on what your thoughts on the book are, and I'll see you in the next video.